New developments today in the Gilgo Beach murders case. A judge in Suffolk County ruled Rex Heuermann will face a single trial for all 7 of his alleged killings. The decision denied a move from the defense to split the case into multiple trials. Long Island reporter Shantae Lands has the details from Riverhead.
Accused Gilgo Beach serial killer Rex Heuermann is thrusted back into the spotlight after a Suffolk County judge determined that the estranged Long Island husband and father of 2 will face a single trial for all 7 victims, as opposed to splitting it into up to 5 separate trials.
The judge ruled against us. We don't like the decision. We don't agree with the decision. But in our system, we accept the decision and we move forward. That's how our system works.
Heuermann's lead defense attorney, Michael Brown, argues that the first 3 charged killings should be tried separately from the rest because of the timing of their deaths, spanning 17 years, how they were killed, and the locations where the women's bodies were found. Prosecutors who want one trial pointed to Heuermann's familiarity as a former seasonal Jones Beach employee. From 1981 to 1984, prosecutors say Heuermann used to drive an all-terrain vehicle going from field to field, making sure beachgoers were off the property after it closed. A role prosecutors say made Heuermann extremely familiar with Ocean Parkway at night, which is the same spot where 6 of the bodies tied to his case were found.
I think a big consideration by the court, which was stated in their decision, was that planning document. And that planning document talks about, we would submit, talks about murders that had occurred, that are about to occur, and that are going to occur in the future.
The 62-year-old Manhattan architect from Massapequa Park was first arrested in July of 2023. He pleaded not guilty. Heuermann's attorney spoke briefly with him today after court.
We got the decision in chambers. I handed it to him. We had a brief conversation with him in the back. We moved forward.
It started with a routine search and ended with one of the most disturbing discoveries in modern American criminal history. In December 2010, a police officer and his K-9 unit were walking through thick brush along a quiet stretch of coastline in Long Island, New York. The search had nothing to do with murder. Authorities were looking for a missing woman who had vanished months earlier, but instead of finding her, the dog stopped near the edge of Ocean Parkway and refused to move. Buried in the sand was a set of human remains, then another and another. Within days, what began as a missing person search turned into something far more terrifying. Investigators realized they were not dealing with a single crime. They were looking at the work of someone who may have been killing for years, possibly without ever being caught. More bodies would be found, more questions would surface, and for over a decade, the case remained one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in the United States. Tonight, we're going to walk through what happened, step by step, what investigators found, what they believe, and what still doesn't make sense. If you follow true crime documentaries and want more deep investigations like this, make sure you stay until the end of the video, because this case only gets darker the further you go. Long before the name Gilgo Beach became known across the country, the victims were simply people trying to live their lives. Most of the women connected to the case were young. Many had families, some were working difficult jobs to survive. Several had been reported missing months or even years before their remains were discovered. At the time, their disappearances didn't receive national attention. In many cases, the reports were treated as isolated incidents, with no clear connection between them. That would change in the winter of 2010. Police in Suffolk County were searching for a woman named Shannon Gilbert, who had disappeared earlier that year after leaving a home in the Oak Beach area. According to reports, she had made a series of frantic phone calls before vanishing, telling emergency operators that she believed someone was after her. When officers began searching the nearby marshland and brush along Ocean Parkway, they expected to find clues related to her disappearance. Instead, they found something no one was prepared for. On December 11, 2010, the remains of a young woman were discovered wrapped in burlap near the roadside. The location was isolated and surrounded by thick vegetation with almost no houses nearby. Investigators quickly realized this was not a recent burial. The remains had been there for some time. As officers expanded the search, they found 3 more sets of remains within a short distance of the first. All 4 victims appeared to have been placed in similar ways. All were found along the same stretch of road, and all had been missing for months or years before being discovered. That pattern immediately raised a terrifying possibility. Authorities began to consider that they might be dealing with a serial killer. According to investigators, the placement of the bodies suggested planning. The location was remote, but not impossible to reach. The remains were positioned in a way that seemed deliberate, almost as if the person responsible believed the area would never be searched. The discovery shocked the local community. Ocean Parkway had always been seen as a quiet coastal road, used mostly by drivers heading toward the beach. Now it was being described as a possible dumping ground for multiple victims. And the search wasn't over. In the months that followed, police continued combing the area. What they found only made the case more disturbing. Additional remains were discovered, some belonging to victims who had been missing for years. In some cases, investigators were not even sure at first whether the remains belonged to the same person. The evidence suggested that whoever was responsible may have been active for a long time, possibly longer than anyone had realized. Public reporting at the time indicated that many of the victims had worked in escort services or had met people through online ads. Investigators did not immediately say whether that detail was connected to the crimes, but the similarities could not be ignored. The case began attracting national attention. People wanted to know how something like this could happen without anyone noticing. How could multiple victims disappear, end up in the same place, and no one realized there was a pattern? For years, there were no clear answers. The investigation continued, but progress was slow. Leads came in, but none led to an arrest. Detectives followed tips, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed old reports, trying to find something that connected all the pieces together. Behind the scenes, frustration was growing. According to later statements from officials, the case was complicated by jurisdiction issues, limited evidence, and the fact that many of the disappearances had happened years earlier. Some families felt the investigation was not moving fast enough. Others believed mistakes may have been made in the early stages. And as time passed, one question kept coming back. If these victims were all left in the same area, who knew that place well enough to keep returning to it without being seen? That question would stay unanswered for more than 10 years. But what investigators didn't realize at the time was that the clue that would eventually change everything had been sitting in the case file from the very beginning. For years, the Gilgo Beach investigation seemed frozen in place. After the discovery of multiple victims along Ocean Parkway, authorities launched one of the largest homicide investigations in Suffolk County history. Detectives reviewed missing person reports from across the country, trying to identify victims and look for patterns. Tips came in from different states. Families called police, hoping their loved ones might finally be found. But despite the attention, the case moved slowly. Publicly, investigators said they were still working leads. Privately, frustration was building. According to later reporting, the early years of the investigation were complicated by disagreements between agencies, changes in leadership, and the difficulty of working with evidence that was already years old. Some of the disappearances dated back to the early 2000s. Records were incomplete. Phone data was limited. Eyewitness memories had faded, and the person responsible, if there was one person, had left very little behind. Still, there were clues. Authorities began to notice similarities between several of the victims. Many had advertised services online. Some had communicated with clients using prepaid phones. In a few cases, family members reported that the last known contact came from someone arranging a meeting. Investigators could not say publicly that the cases were connected, but behind the scenes, the possibility of a serial offender remained a serious concern. Then another detail started to stand out: phone records. According to information later released by law enforcement, some of the victims' phones had received calls after they disappeared. In a few instances, the calls were traced to locations in New York City. At the time, the technology available made it difficult to narrow down exactly who was responsible, but the pattern suggested the same person might have contacted multiple victims. If that was true, the killer was not only careful, he was confident. Years passed, and the case became one of the most talked about unsolved mysteries in the country. Documentaries were made, podcasts discussed theories, online forums tried to connect the clues. Some people believed there were multiple killers. Others believed the crimes were unrelated. Authorities, however, remained cautious, saying only that the investigation was ongoing. Then, more than a decade after the first bodies were found, something changed. In 2022, Suffolk County officials announced that a new task force would review the entire case from the beginning. The decision came after years of criticism from families and the public, who felt the investigation had stalled. The new team included local detectives, state investigators, and federal agents. Their goal was simple but difficult: go back through every piece of evidence, every report, every phone record, and see what had been missed. Sometimes cold cases are solved not because of new evidence, but because someone looks at the old evidence differently. That's exactly what happened here. According to authorities, one of the key breakthroughs came from re-examining phone data connected to the victims. Technology had improved since the early 2000s. Records that once seemed vague could now be analyzed more precisely. Investigators began tracing calls again, comparing locations, dates, and patterns. And one name started appearing in their review. At first, it was just a possibility, a number linked to a device linked to a location connected to a person. That person was Rex Heuermann. Public records showed that Heuermann was an architect living in Massapequa Park, a suburban community on Long Island. He owned a home, ran a business, and had lived in the area for years. Nothing about his public life immediately suggested he would be connected to one of the most disturbing cases in the country. But investigators noticed something that caught their attention. According to authorities, the phone data suggested that a device linked to the suspect had been in contact with at least one of the victims. The records also showed the device moving through areas connected to the investigation, including locations near Ocean Parkway. That alone was not enough to make an arrest. Phone data can be misleading, devices can be shared, numbers can change. But the task force kept digging. They looked at vehicle records, they looked at travel patterns, they looked at where the suspect lived and how close it was to the locations where the remains had been found. Then they found something else. Witness statements from years earlier mentioned a pickup truck seen near one of the victims around the time she disappeared. At the time, the information didn't lead anywhere. But when investigators reviewed the old report, they noticed the description matched a vehicle registered to Rex Heuermann. It was the first moment the case started to feel different. Still, police moved carefully. After more than 10 years, they could not risk making a mistake. According to officials, investigators began quietly watching the suspect, collecting information and building a timeline of his movements. They reviewed business records, they checked travel history, they gathered DNA samples from items connected to him. Each piece alone didn't prove anything, but together, authorities say, the picture started to form, and the more they looked, the harder it became to ignore. For over a decade, the Gilgo Beach killer had been a mystery. Now, for the first time, investigators believed they might finally know who they were looking for. But even then, they didn't move right away, because before they could make an arrest, they needed one piece of evidence that could place the suspect closer to the victims than ever before. And then when that evidence finally came in, the entire case changed overnight. By the time investigators focused their attention on Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach case had already remained unsolved for more than a decade. Authorities knew that if they were wrong, the consequences would be serious. This was one of the most closely watched investigations in the country. Every step had to be supported by evidence, not assumptions. According to officials, the task force spent months quietly building the case, reviewing records, comparing timelines, and waiting for the moment when the pieces would finally fit together. That moment came through forensic testing. Public reporting later revealed that investigators had collected DNA from items connected to the suspect. Some of the samples were taken from discarded objects, and others were gathered during surveillance. The goal was to compare the DNA to evidence recovered from the victims and from the locations where the remains had been found. For years, earlier testing methods had not produced clear results, but technology had improved. Techniques that did not exist when the bodies were discovered were now being used in cold cases across the country. According to authorities, one of the most important pieces of evidence came from hair found near one of the victims. Investigators said the hair was tested again using newer methods, and the results suggested a possible link to the suspect's family. Officials were careful in how they described the finding. They did not say it proved guilt. They said it was consistent with someone connected to the suspect's household. But combined with phone records, vehicle information, and location data, the evidence gave investigators enough confidence to move forward. In July 2023, after months of surveillance and preparation, police made their move. Rex Heuermann was taken into custody in Manhattan. According to authorities, the arrest happened without warning. Detectives had waited until they believed they had enough evidence to present the case in court. Within hours, the news spread across the country. After more than 10 years, the Gilgo Beach case finally had a suspect. Prosecutors announced charges related to several of the victims whose remains had been found along Ocean Parkway. They described the investigation as long, complex, and carefully built over time. Officials also said the case was still ongoing, and they did not rule out the possibility of additional charges. The arrest shocked many people who lived near the suspect. Neighbors described him as quiet. Some said they barely knew him. Others said he seemed ordinary. Public records showed he had worked for years as an architect, with clients and business contacts across the region. Nothing about his public life suggested involvement in violent crime. That contrast made the case even more unsettling. According to investigators, the suspect had lived on Long Island during the time the victims disappeared. He was familiar with the area. He owned vehicles similar to those described in earlier witness reports. Phone records placed devices linked to him in locations connected to the victims. But even after the arrest, not every question was answered. Authorities did not say exactly how many crimes they believed were connected. They did not say whether more than one person could have been involved. They did not confirm whether all the remains found near Gilgo Beach belonged to the same investigation. And they did not explain why the case had taken so long to solve. Some families of the victims said they were relieved to see progress. Others said the arrest brought mixed emotions. For more than a decade, they had lived without answers, not knowing who was responsible or whether the truth would ever come out. Investigators also faced new challenges. Because the case involved events going back many years, every piece of evidence had to be carefully reviewed. Defense attorneys questioned the timeline. Experts discussed the reliability of phone data. Forensic evidence was examined again and again, with both sides arguing over what it proved and what it did not. Authorities maintained that the case was built on a combination of evidence, not a single clue. According to prosecutors, the phone records, the witness descriptions, the vehicle information, and the forensic testing all pointed in the same direction. Still, the investigation was not declared finished. Officials said they continued to review other disappearances, other reports, and other remains found near the same area. They did not rule out the possibility that more victims could be connected. They also did not rule out the possibility that some cases might never be fully explained. For the public, the arrest answered one question, but raised many more. How had someone been able to commit crimes for so long without being caught? Were there warning signs that had been missed? Could the case have been solved sooner? And the question that still lingers today, was the person arrested responsible for everything found at Gilgo Beach, or only part of it? That uncertainty is one of the reasons the case continues to hold attention across the country. Because even now, after the arrest, the story does not feel finished. Not for the families, not for the investigators, and not for the people who followed the case from the beginning. The stretch of road along Ocean Parkway looks the same as it always did. Cars pass by. The ocean is only a short distance away. To anyone driving through, it seems quiet, ordinary. But beneath that quiet, the history of what happened there has not disappeared. Multiple victims, years of unanswered questions, and a mystery that took more than a decade to begin to unravel. Our cases like this remind us how easily people can disappear without anyone realizing what is really happening. They also show how long it can take for the truth to come out, even when the evidence is there from the start. Investigators say the work is not over. Families are still waiting for closure. And the full story of Gilgo Beach may not be known for years. If you've followed this case, I want to hear what you think. Do you believe investigators found the right suspect? Or do you think there are still pieces missing? Leave your theory in the comments because discussions like this help keep cases alive and keep attention on the victims who deserve to be remembered. If you want more real, in-depth true crime documentaries told with facts, not rumors, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who follows true crime. And if you ever have information about a real case, no matter how small it seems, authorities always ask that you report it to the proper investigators. Because sometimes, the clue that solves everything comes from the person who never thought it mattered.